Hi, we'd like to welcome you to the first in a series of webinars designed for airports and airport GIS professionals. I'm Terry Bills, the Transportation Industry Manager here at Esri, and today I'm joined by Randy Murphy and David Grigg, both with Aurora Engineers, business partner specializing in airports GIS. Today's webinar is designed to give a broad overview of airport GIS and to highlight how successful airports leverage GIS. Before we begin, I'd like to point out that we are recording this webinar, and while everyone will be on mute, there will be time for question and answers at the end of the presentation. You can type your questions into the question box and we'll try to answer as many as time allows. And additionally, the slides that you see today as part of this webinar will be available to you on the GeoNet group, Departments of Transportation, and we'll give you that link. So first off, let me start by briefly introducing this new webinar series for airports and airport GIS professionals. The main focus of the webinars will be primarily on airport IT and airport GIS, designed to highlight a wide range of issues of importance to airport managers. We hope to draw widely within the industry and to take advantage of a number of long-standing experts and other thought leaders, and to combine both technical presentations with business-oriented presentations over the series. So we hope that these presentations will not only help each of you in your own positions, but that you might also be able to point your senior business directors to these webinars as appropriate. So because I'm not aware of any airport which has reached perfection in their GIS, I think we all can agree that we're on this journey together. And so we certainly hope that these webinars will provide some additional guidance and an opportunity to learn for all of us. And final goal is really to help build a strong community in the airport GIS community. Obviously, both AAAE and ACI have long supported some of this, but we want to help magnify both the understanding of how GIS helps airports, but also how to continue to build our community. So over the course of the webinars, what we hope to highlight are really what we would call the connected smart airport, and really to look at this as a totality, but then also to look at each of the individual pieces that really make up what we would call the connected smart airport. So that's the long-range goal, and again, hopefully this will be a journey that we're all on together. So before I turn it over, let me introduce our two speakers. David Grigg is Vice President of, he's the Geospatial Practice Lead at Aurora Engineers, and he specializes in the delivery of geospatial services to airports. And he has over 15 years experience, and he's worked with all size airports to meet the requirements of not only the FAA's Airports GIS program, but a wide range of other requirements as well, geospatial assessments and enterprise GIS roadmaps. And he is a member of Esri's Airports Industry Advisory Board. And then secondly, Randy Murphy, he's the Geospatial Practice Technical Lead at Aurora, and he's actually been in the aviation industry for over 25 years, the last 23 of which have been focused on the application of geospatial technologies for airports. So he's helped geographic information systems at numerous large, medium, and small airports, and has a particularly strong technical focus on the development of data standards, implementation of databases, and design of computer applications. So with that, I guess I'm going to turn it over to you, Randy, and you're going to kick it off. So take it away.
Thank you very much, Terry. Appreciate the introductions. David and I have worked to develop an agenda today that really pulls together a lot of the experiences we've had over the 20 some odd years that David and I have been working exclusively with airports trying to implement GIS. And we've seen the industry change a lot over those years. And what we're seeing right now is that a lot of airports, an increasing number of airports are using GIS, and it's also being used in a broader sense within airports. So one of the things we want to talk about is, well, why is this happening? I want to hear a little bit about what some professionals in the industry are saying through a survey that we conducted a few years ago. And then really get into, well, how can airports, such as those on the call or consultants that are working with airports, leverage some of the lessons that we've learned over those couple of decades and create some of the success stories that we'll highlight a little bit earlier at your airports. We'll talk a little bit about the resources required and how to overcome some common challenges. So just getting started, why are airports, an increasing number of airports, using GIS? Well, really, I guess I'd ask the question, why aren't they? You know, we've got, if we look at the old to the new, it wasn't that long ago that we were relying on handwritten messages delivered via airmail at one point. Faxes weren't in our distant future, but I think most of us on the call probably have email boxes that were full this morning with correspondences, and we've just gone to an electronic age. Similarly, back in the 1930s, L. Ray Jepson started doing what I would argue is GIS on a handwritten piece of paper over in the lower left there. And he sketched out airports, and he took some notes on some important attributes of those airports, and he published it in a book, a hard copy book. Well, really, we're doing the same thing today. We're just using more modern technology to get that information out. So I think it is an inevitable change that airports will be using more and more GIS. And what airports are doing with GIS is ultimately using it to collaborate. Airports are complex places with a lot of things going on that need to be all coordinated and in sync with one another. But yet, too often we see things broken down into different work processes or departmental silos or within different projects or task activities at airports, and without the collaboration across boundaries. And it's that collaboration that really not only creates the value that GIS offers, but really helps alleviate some of the problems that airports face as a whole and achieve some of their successes that they're looking to achieve. Ultimately, what we believe can happen with GIS is to take geospatial data that tells us where things are and how they relate to one another, and to drive the intelligence that we need to operate more efficient, safe, and effective airports. It's really the underlying goal. So that's why airports are using GIS, but what are other people saying? So as part of a Transportation Research Board subcommittee on airport data, GIS data, and applications, we conducted a survey last year on the level, asking a number of questions. One of them was the level of GIS that is being used by various airports. And what we saw, which is not totally a surprise at this point after airports have been looking at GIS for arguably 20, 25 years, is that most airports that respond to the survey have it at an enterprise level, meaning it spans a couple different divisions. But still, a surprising number are still using it just within an individual department or just an individual. And in those cases, they're really not getting the collaborative benefits that we talked about just a little bit ago. Data is really where the value is. We're trying to turn data into that intelligence I mentioned earlier. And some of the key data sets that the survey respondents said they wanted to see in the GIS were aerial imagery, pictures worth 1,000 words. So aerial imagery is a very, very popular data set. We're seeing that increasing in terms of the usage at airports. But beyond that, looking at the airport layout, airspace, we'll talk a little bit about airspace later. And utilities and interior are also really, really important. And if you look at the blue and yellow portions of those bar charts, you'll notice that that's those data sets that more and more people want more of. And so while some airports are using them, more airports want more utilities and interior data. And we'll talk about how that can happen in just a bit. So some of the successful solutions that airports have implemented using geospatial technology. This was a question we asked of the survey, and not surprisingly, most people said that basic map viewer, people have invested in the data and they want to get it out to people. But the next two or three applications consistently have been popular applications for using GIS within the airport industry. One being airspace, next being lease and property information, utilities, and then getting into some of the asset management types of applications like where are the airfield lights, signs, different maintenance work orders, things that need to be maintainable assets such as pavement, et cetera, et cetera. Now, Esri has put together a wonderful platform get airports going on this. It's called the Airport GIS for Aviation, the airport component of it. There's also an aeronautical portion of it, but the airport component of it contains many things, including a data model that builds on the FAA's data model for airports GIS, but then takes it kind of to the next level. It also includes some applications, some tools to improve the data, to validate the data, to make sure that the quality is there, and then ultimately to exchange that data with others. And so the airports component of this ArcGIS for Aviation product line is really a great place to start. Some of the applications it offers include basic airport GIS viewers and data structures, obstacle analysis, signage and marking, and there's others, and also a growing list that Esri has on their list for the future. So let's talk about some of these application areas, the few that are amongst the most popular. One that always ranks either number 1 or number 2 after the basic map viewer is Airspace. And the reason for Airspace being so popular is that we have continued growth through the history of the aviation industry. The demand for air travel has grown at a fairly steady pace. Yet the amount of infrastructure that we have, the airports and the runways and taxiways that can support that, just aren't growing at the same pace. We need to be able to get more out of the assets that we have. And technology and information, geospatial information, is the way to do that. And so that's why airspace is such an important area to look at. How do we get more out of our limited airspace using these tools? And one way to do that is to create a collaborative environment to communicate something which in a three-dimensional picture is inherently obvious, where there's objects that pierce through three-dimensional surfaces that are defined by the FAA and by airlines and others. But to convey that information to somebody in a picture immediately conveys what needs to be done to mitigate those objects or to change the procedures or what have you. Putting this into tabular data or written reports just is not an effective way of doing this. And so this has really been an application area where GIS has had great success, not only at airports, but at the federal space as well. And not just in the US, I should say, as overseas airports using this as well. One element of the airspace analysis is in developing an obstacle action plan. This is something that the FAA has asked, in fact, actually is requiring airports to take a more proactive role in mitigating the objects around the airspace. And this memorandum describes the role that they expect airports to play. But what more and more airports are realizing is that they need a tool such as GIS to make it easy to understand where are the obstacles we need to be concerned about. How do we communicate to the people that we're going to ask to help mitigate those obstacles? And then how do we record when they have been mitigated and convey that to the FAA? We talked about leasing and properties being so important. Most of the airports we've worked at over the years would like a solution or have a solution to visually see where their space is. And airports have a lot of benefits that they accrue from this. Port of Portland, for instance, over in the upper right here, was able to find some space that they had people that were squatting literally on that space, and were able to increase their lease revenue as a result of putting all their data into a GIS. Somebody once said to me, what I need is something that can show me what I can't see with my own eyes, and that's underground utilities. And so whether it's in a 2D environment or now in the 3D environment, mapping underground utilities, maintaining that data, a topic we'll touch on the importance of later, is such a key asset to people that are either constructing or developing or maintaining the infrastructure in and around an airport. As airports and the communities around them tend to grow and encroach on one another, there's an increasing focus on land use compatibility. Two of the key elements of that are airspace planning, but also noise mitigation and other factors such as construction, traffic delays, safety considerations. The good news is the Airport Cooperative Research Program has recently published 2 reports, Report 200 and 206, that talk about the importance of land use compatibility around airports. And specifically, Report 200 provides guidance as to how to use GIS to achieve those goals. Operations, this is an example in the left-hand side of this is of an airport that has moved their GIS into their operations center in a touch screen so that they can have these maps and visuals and displays and photos and aerials, et cetera, at their fingertips, literally, in the course of an emergency or any event that happens at that airport. But then also the operations folks, they have responsibilities to inspect the airfield and need to know where certain signage is, airfield lights and other assets that are very important, and need to be able to understand them in an intuitive way that they're used to seeing and enter data that then can be reported into a work management system if something needs to be fixed. And what we've seen is doing that on a map allows them to be more precise about what they're seeing, where they're seeing it, what needs to be fixed. So ultimately the issues are addressed more quickly. Extending it beyond airfield assets, we're seeing a lot of airports want to know where all the amenities, trash cans, restroom fixtures, doors, locks, et cetera, that are within airspace, the airport interior space. There's tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands of assets that are relevant to various people at the airport. And what a better way to see them and interact with them is to put them on a map and have information that can be tied to those assets. So just want to share a few trends that we're seeing within how airports are using GIS. One is the importance of geospatial data indoors. It's a statistic that humans in general spend about 90% of our time indoors. But for airports, this is such an important revenue generator. And so it's really hard to maintain that data, though, because the interior space at airports is just constantly changing to improve that space, expand the space, et cetera. And so putting this into a GIS is one way airports have been able to stay on top of that data. And Esri has recently, I think it was about a year ago, Terry, that Esri launched the ArcGIS Indoors product, which, similar to ArcGIS for Aviation's airport component, the ArcGIS for Indoors provides a wonderful platform for airports to get a jump start in mapping their interior space, cleaning up the data so that advanced tools such as routing within the building can be provided. And then also application templates for putting that data into three-dimensional web applications or wayfinding applications or even kiosks that airports can install within their terminal space. So it's a great platform for leveraging this data. One of the new and emerging trends for sources of interior data at airports is BIM, Building Information Modeling data. And what we're seeing based on the surveys is that it's still in the early adoption phase. Although some airports have matured their use of BIM, there's still more that are just beginning to scratch the surface. What's a little bit of a concern is we asked the same question in a similar survey that was done in 2016 and found that very similar results. And so the point being is that there's a bit of a slow change going on here, and we're looking at how we can break down that change and achieve faster results. But the challenge is that airports receive these BIM deliverables, which oftentimes are very, very large files, and they store them, and they're not quite sure how to integrate them with other data sets. Some are converting and extracting data, but the ultimate goal is to have that data seamlessly come into the information systems that are used to operate and maintain the airport. There's a lot of words on this slide, but a few that really caught my attention were that in general, we, not just the airport industry, but there's 57 trillion that is expected to be spent on infrastructure for the next decade. And a lot of that data, a lot of those larger projects end up finishing over budget and over time. And then the data gets kind of thrown over the fence, and the folks that are operating and maintaining the airport, the place where most of the costs incur, don't have the information they need, especially when they're working with new facilities that have just opened. And I really like these last two quotes here that are talking about geospatial data and BIM is really essential to the success and challenges we have going forward. So Esri's approach to this has been to partner with Autodesk, and I think it's been a great partnership. One of the things that's evolved out of that is this conceptual diagram, which looks at GIS and the evolution of using it for planning and design, but then passing it over for ultimate design and construction and as-built documentation to the BIM side, but then taking that as-built documentation and putting it back into operational GIS systems that can be used to operate and maintain that facility. But down into the technology that's evolved out of that, Esri has developed a number of connectors between some of their core products and some of Autodesk's core products, as well as the ability to read Revit files directly in ArcGIS Pro. And these are really how this interconnectivity is going to occur. There's also companies such as Safe Software, which have a wonderful tool called Feature Manipulation Engine, which is also the core of the ArcGIS Interoperability extension. And this tool allows the data to be transformed into what we need, no matter what format it comes in or what structure it's in. It allows the data to be produced where we need it, when we need it. And then we need to get data out to people. And this is the other trend we're seeing, is an increased use of laptops and tablets and PDAs in the field, not only to collect data, but also to support people in the operations and maintenance and inspection side of the airport that we've talked about already. Cloud-based technology, another really important trend we're seeing, an increasing desire to use some of the resources and services that are out there that are fairly inexpensive, and to get programs such as these GIS programs at airports started. There's a lot of advantages, such as low cost, quick entry, scalability, mobile access, et cetera. But also there's many desires airports have to keep things internal and host GIS on premise. And so it's really a case of each airport looking at some of these pluses and minuses of either approach. But what we are seeing is the trend of more and more airports looking at things like ArcGIS online and other online resources in order to help publish their GIS data to the people that need it. Another trend is geospatial asset management. And we're really, when we look at the hundreds of thousands of airports, of assets that airports need to manage and deal with, you really need to see them locationally. That locational component, not only for visuals, but for how these assets relate to one another and how they come together to form systems is such an important thing for us assets to be on top of. And so what we're seeing a lot of action with right now is airports tying Maximo and other maintenance management systems such as CityWorks and other products in with their GIS so they can have the visuals and locational intelligence along with the attributes. So with that, we're going to share some examples of how airports have been successful in doing some things I've just talked about.
So David, over to you.
Yep. Thank you, Terry. So there are a couple of success stories that we do want to highlight today. One we want to start with here is Reno-Tahoe International Airport. It's a great example of an airport that leveraged the FAA's airport GIS submittal requirements to establish geospatial solutions to benefit the airport business. Using Esri's ArcGIS Online, Reno-Tahoe International configured web applications to support its users. If you looking at the screen on the top left, the Tahoe Airport, created a GIS data viewer for running what-if scenarios and interacting with the data that they collected as part of the FAA program. But they also developed other applications, including the Airspace application that allows planners to examine existing and evaluate new obstacles to the airport's airspace and the surrounding areas. But they also expanded their geodatabase to include interior data sets. And they leveraged these interior data sets for a lease and property management tool that they then integrated with their property management software, in this case, GCR. This web application enabled the visual analysis of lease information, such as lease end dates and lease contact info. I guess let me say also that, when they click on the different portal applications, this is what you generally see. It takes you to the application that you're authorized for. So it's a great way to control permissions within the airport. Another success story that we want to point out is Fort Lauderdale International Airport. While Reno-Tahoe leveraged ArcGIS online technology, Fort Lauderdale International Airport deployed an on-premise portal and ArcGIS server technology. They use this technology to configure applications for their end users. And example applications here include an airport parcel management that's linked to their SharePoint library, and another app for interior lease space management that's able to display information from their property management system, currently PropWorks. But also, on outside the airport, they developed an application for their noise insulation program, and this application allows for the visualization and understanding of the location of homes that are participating in that program. So, how do you get there as an airport to implement a geospatial program? Whether we feel that following a proven path for success is a way to get there, and whether your airport is just getting started or wanting to enhance current offerings, we found the following steps in this roadmap to be a best practice. And so let's step through a few of these. The first is really to conduct a discovery. In this step, you're inventorying and documenting your airport's current status, as it relates to the usage of geospatial data, applications and systems, and also organizational governance. So, you want to understand what's working and what's being maintained, but you also want to know what is not. In this phase, you may also want to consider what other airports are doing and include that as part of your discovery. But the overall goal of the discovery is a roadmap document, that prioritizes your next steps towards a successful program. And this prioritization can be as simple as a matrix, as you see on the screen, that takes into account things like return on investment or technical feasibility, or possibly quickness to deploy. So once you've established your priorities, the most logical next step is to establish your foundation for your program. And we recommend adapting and adopting a data model as one of your first foundational steps. And there are several starting points for you in this. The FAA AGIS program has a data model. Esri has several data models that you can leverage, including the local government, and also, for indoors, you should consider ArcGIS Indoors Information Model as part of that process. But you should let the information that you've gathered as part of your discovery guide your needs for a model. So determining what to accept from both CAD and GIS inputs, but also BIM. In this phase, it is also important, we think, to establish data quality expectations, as well as identification and addressing standards. Consistent naming is becoming an increasing problem or some, a challenge that airports need to meet, just based on the amount of interior wayfinding solutions that are being requested by your stakeholders. So after establishing your data model and referring back to your roadmap goals, the migration of data to the model to support your goals is next. Randy mentioned it earlier, we typically employ automated tools such as Safe Software or the Interoperability tool to assist in this process. But you can also use these tools to conduct QA and generate reports for verification. But with your database populated now, your next step is to establish how your data will be shared, at your airport. And in this phase of system architecture, you'll not only be establishing the architecture, but we're big proponents in documenting it for reference. From conceptual to as-built, it's important to record this information and what technology is being used and where is it located. Is it in the cloud or is it in on premise? This phase really sets the foundation for publishing your data at the airport. Now you're ready at this point to leverage your Esri software to create the solutions for your end users. Using your prioritized list of solutions from the discovery phase, work in this phase of deploying applications is to not only define the web app builder tools that may meet your end users' requirements, but also what integrations may be beneficial to enable access to siloed data in other departments or other systems. And also, more and more, we're seeing a need for executive level solutions that provide operational dashboards and the showing of KPI data about airport data usage. And though the list is last in our roadmap, establishing organizational support, should happen throughout your initiative at the airport and beyond. This step is where your airport defines and documents the expectations of your data, from data standards that define your data specifications to the policies and procedures that define how the data should be submitted and who's the responsible party for that data. But overall, organizational support is very important to ensuring your data and business solutions are current and of the highest quality. And we really believe that this is where documenting your workflows at the airport is a key resource for this. So Randy, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, thank you, David. So we'd be remiss in talking about all the successes and things that you can do with GIS without also touching on what's required to make it all happen. And that's a question we've often been asked over the years. And one is how much does it cost? And one of the things that it's disappointing, but it's unfortunate. There's a misconception out there that costs millions to report and requires a lot of staff to support it. And really, that is far from the truth, especially in this day and age where we have tools such as ArcGIS Online, which is more or less a pay-as-you-go kind of thing, There's imagery services. We talked about aerial imagery as being such an important data set for airports, and now there's online pay-as-you-go services such as Nearmap that is offering fairly recent high-quality ortho imagery. And so putting those two resources together and paying for what you utilize out of that is a very inexpensive way to get started. You know, some of this misconception started back 20 years ago or so when we didn't have these resources and airports were forced to buy large servers and make initial investments in large software expenses, and then to hire consultants to install all that stuff, and then to begin to develop the data from ground up. Well, we have a lot of these things at our fingertips. And data, you know, I'll touch on data as well for a moment, because data is oftentimes the more expensive element of a GIS program, just collecting the data and then putting it together. But really, airports have so much geospatial data that is in the form of CAD data, increasingly Revit data, but also GIS data that may have been collected for an airport's GIS survey. And that data is readily available, and using some of the tools that we talked about to change that data and transform it into a data model, such as what's provided by ArcGIS for Aviation, is a great way to get started in a fairly inexpensive way. And so what we're seeing is a trend of airports spending a lot less than they used to on getting started with GIS, and then growing it incrementally with additional investment as warranted as more and more users come on. And so we've seen other airports leverage some of the existing resources they've had with their city or their county, or some airports are part of a broader enterprise licensing agreement, which gives them even more access to the software resources that they can leverage. So again, we're seeing a lot of airports doing a lot with GIS for under 100,000. Yet there are still a lot of airports that have invested quite heavily in GIS, and they have staff that maintain data, they have systems, some have opted to maintain on-premise servers and what have you, and they're spending more money on it. But they're also finding, and we'll touch on this in just a second, they're also finding that that money is being warranted. Because ultimately, one of the questions that we asked airports is, are they seeing the benefits exceed the costs? And the majority of folks said that they did. About 2/3 said it either far exceeded or somewhat exceeded the costs that they were getting the benefits of GIS. And another portion that makes it over 75% said at least it broke even. And I would argue that those examples could be improved, and we could see even more cost benefit at airports. There's been a lot of studies that have been done about how much airports have benefited from GIS, you know, and some of the results have been in the 2.5 to 3 times benefits over costs can be achieved with some of these methodologies that David described before. So ultimately, GIS is cost beneficial and does provide a return on investment for airports. Another element of resourcing a GIS program is staff. And we're also often asked, how much people do we need? How many people do we need to maintain the data? And again, this is something that can be done incrementally. It's not a case where you need to hire 5 or 6 people just to get going with GIS. One person, and we've seen this in many airports, can be very effective, even on a part-time basis, getting started, pulling the data together, publishing it out into various applications. There's more templates available. There's more resources that are free to download. There are data sets that are easily accessible. And so maybe some assistance can be used early on to get going, but once some applications are done, airports can have a staff of 1 or 2, or even maybe a part-time person doing quite a lot with GIS. And then again, growing it with time as more and more data is available. The other misnomer with staffing a GIS program that I should mention as well is that airports often have CAD and BIM people on staff as well. And when we look at a geospatial program, it's not just the people that know how to use the Esri software that should be counted as part of the mix, but it's the people that are using the CAD software, the BIM software, other asset management software. These people are all part of a geospatial program. And the airports that we've seen that have been more successful in implementing GIS have been those that recognize that and bring those teams together, whether they report within the same department or if different departments, at least their colleagues that are working closely together. And I think that's really key to the success of the program.
Randy, let me just interject. Evidently, a few people are saying that they're having problems with the sound. So I don't know if maybe if you could just a little closer, perhaps, and let's see if we can. I'm hearing you fine, but again, we're getting a couple of comments that the sound seems to come in and out.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. I'll try to speak a little more loudly. So this slide is another statistic that came out of the survey that we asked. We asked the number of GIS users versus maintainers. And what's interesting is that the numbers of maintainers hover between the 1 to 8, 10. In one case, one airport reported 20. But some of the airports that have more people also have many more users. And so the blue bars here indicate the number of users. And indeed, some airports are having 450, 400, 250 users of the GIS, but still able to maintain it with a fairly small focused staff of folks. And I think that's really key to success. The average of all these statistics here is about 20 users per one data maintainer, but that's a little bit of a misleading number because the range was so great, and we're seeing some airports with more users effectively maintain GIS with less than that number of people. So another thing that I think it's prudent to talk about are some of the challenges. You know, over the last 20 years, airports have been increasing their use of GIS, but oftentimes have run into some challenges. And so as a part of these surveys that we've conducted, we've asked the question, what challenges have you faced and how do you overcome them? And not surprisingly, some of the main challenges are the same year after year. The top three in each of these surveys was resistance to change, data maintenance, and lack of funding. And you know, resistance to change is a human factor. That's true of all of us. We tend to form our patterns and our ways, and it's sometimes difficult to change. But I would argue that if you give an incentive to somebody that shows them how they can be more efficient or effective at what they do, that they're going to want to change to that. And so I think that's our challenge as GIS professionals, is to build data and tools that help people be more efficient and effective in what they do. But I do also want to touch on data maintenance, because we're hearing that that's such an important challenge that airports have faced. And if data is where the value is that needs to be conveyed through our applications to the end users to create that intelligence that we desire, we really need to learn how to maintain data better. Another term that's being used a lot is data governance, which is broader than just data maintenance. It involves the policies and the procedures, the roles and responsibilities, the monitoring of how data is being maintained so that metrics can be calculated and what have you. That's really a key area to push forward with, and to make sure that we have the value in our systems, because if end users ultimately get a hold of some data through an application, they find that it's not accurate, then they'll decide that they can't trust that application and not proceed with using the GIS going forward. So data maintenance is really a key challenge. So some of the ways to overcome that, a lot has to do with where the GIS is placed within the organization. And this is a debate that has gone on for the whole 20 years that I can remember airports considering where to put GIS. And the ultimate answer is GIS can be successful in any department within an airport. And we've seen many examples of it being successful in different departments. It all comes down to the people and the ability of those people to communicate with one another across organizational boundaries, which often means that they've got some strong management buy-in support for what they're doing. That said, some typical options of where airports have put their GIS group is within IT, which makes perfect sense given the hardware and software resources and cloud capabilities that they are, so it relies heavily on IT. But the planning and engineering groups are often closer to the data, so we've also seen a lot of success with GIS being placed within those groups. But again, going back to what I said before, regardless of where it is, it's really the key to success is the collaboration across the different groups. The other thing is acceptance to change, that I talked about just a moment ago. And what we've seen some airports do is to really work closely with their users from the get-go. It doesn't mean that they have to burden the users and constantly ask them to attend meetings, but just outreach, you know, walking down to somebody's desk or a new hire or somebody that's got a challenge and saying, hey, you know, here's a map that maybe could address your needs, or we have this application you may not have heard of, let me show it to you. You know, really having that outreach available, and then listening to people when they express their needs and talk about how they could be met with GIS. These are some of the ways that we've seen airports overcome this challenge of acceptance of change. And with that, the management will come. Once they start seeing that benefit and staff talking about it and benefits flowing from it, the management will begin to believe in it more and support it more. And that management support is ultimately really critical. And the management support's not just a case of funding a program or saying, yes, we have a GIS program, but it's really when decisions need to be made, when resources are limited, GIS is a tool they turn to get the job done, not turn away from and go back to traditional means. So these are some of the methods that we've seen being successful to overcome the challenges of achieving success at GIS at airports. So with that, we'd like to open it up to some questions and answers and some discussion here.
Okay, thanks, Randy, and thanks, David. Let's see, you can, everyone, you can type your questions into the question box, and we'll, as I said, we'll throw it open to questions. Let me start. There was a couple of questions really relating to data governance, and you know, Randy, you and I were just at TRB. I would have to say that that was probably, in the sessions that I went to and committees, that was probably the #1 topic. And you know, so maybe do you want to speak a little bit about kind of success with data governance? Because as you said, it's not just data maintenance. The problem I think that most airports have is that it's one thing to develop the data initially, but then how do you maintain that data over time? And really, how do you establish good and effective data governance rules and really get the buy-in, you know, from the various departments across the airport to really engage in data governance? And I think it's a lot more difficult to sort of achieve success in data governance than people sometimes think going into it. So do you want to maybe speak, you and David want to speak a little bit to that to start off?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll start by saying how not to do it, I guess, is maybe the best way to do it. And what we've seen too often is that the people that have been tasked with maintaining the data are the people that very few within the organization know are there. They're off to the side. They're not visible in meetings. They're not, if people within the organization might know they exist. But the problem with that approach is that the data gets to them last, or maybe never. And so after new facilities are constructed, they're just not getting the information. And I would argue if people are going to leverage geospatial data, the people that maintain the data should be present from the get-go. Doesn't mean that they need to be a part of every design or construction meeting, but just recognize that data is an important outcome of what we build. The virtual campus, the virtual building, the virtual facilities that we're building here need to be constructed alongside and in parallel with the physical infrastructure if we're going to achieve the operational and maintenance success. So in order to do that, we need to have policies and procedures established that help to, and roles and responsibilities, as I talked about earlier, being key components of data governance, so that people within the organization know whose responsibility it is to maintain this data, and know that it's their responsibility to include those people in the various meetings that are discussing the requirements of projects, so that the requirements can get built into scopes and that deliverables can be checked for the quality that is needed, and that as they're received by the airport, they're then checked and then merged into the GIS so that the data is available from the beginning. And all that requires the process procedures, as I mentioned, metrics to make sure it's happening, and then the assignment of roles and responsibilities and a bit of accountability. Now, it's not just about a stick or enforcing policies and you know, requiring people to have these new requirements. There's also a flip side of it, which is the carrot, the benefit, that making it easier. And so one of the things we look to do to ease the burden of data maintenance and data governance is identify, well, where are those changes that are needed within your existing workflows? Maybe a lot of the existing workflows are fine, just need a little bit of a tweaking here or there. And then what are the ways that we can make the software easier for people to comply with some of the requirements that are being established to achieve data governance? So providing templates for not only just GIS file geodatabase templates, but also templates for AutoCAD drawings and templates for Revit models as well, so that airports can then, or the consultants and contractors and airport staff that are developing these geospatial data sets, it's easier for them to comply with the standards from the beginning. So I think it's a multifaceted approach, as I've just talked about, and I think a lot of it is just getting everyone on the same page.
Okay,
I don't know if
great.
there's anything you want to add to that.
I mean, just real briefly, you know, I really, you know, as we talked about in the slide, is, you know, that data governance is a really important place to have some executive partnership and buy-in, and, you know, to actually make folks responsible for, you know, and accountable for the workflows of the data. And I think, you know, that and building a team atmosphere around that, it follows the same workflow, and people are all on the same page as we're trying to maintain this data for a specific purpose and for a specific need.
Okay, great. So there is a question about, since this was the first in a series of webinars, what are the future topics? I can maybe weave our intent is actually to have a combination of, we've identified together with Aurora, another 2 or 3 that we want to do. The next webinar actually will be on what we call a system of engagement and driving high performance airport operations. That one will be coming up in February, and we'll have those up on the website. We are migrating, we're transitioning. We'll have a new airport and aviation website that we hope will go live within the next week or so, and you'll then be able to register and see all the upcoming webinars on that website. So, and then there was looks to me like someone was let's see, Randy and David, can you speak to subsurface utilities and integrating GIS into subsurface utilities?
Yeah, subsurface utilities is a huge topic and a very important one when we look at some of the challenges of utilities at airports and constructing them and also constructing facilities around them. And so there's a number of resources that are available that I want to mention here. One is the American Society of Civil Engineers has had a document on subsurface utility engineering for since 2002, so almost 20 years now. And that document has just recently gone under a major revision, which will be published, should be published by the end of the year. And it's looking at the collection and depiction of subsurface utilities data, and a major part of this revision has been to recognize the criticality of digital data and also three-dimensional data in depicting utilities. And so I point people to that. And there's a new standard that the American Society of Civil Engineers is publishing in parallel with that one, which is the method of depicting current conditions and as-built conditions of utilities. And a lot of that also focuses on the use of digital data, geospatial data. So 2 resources there I point out to. And really those resources are important because collecting the data when it's exposed is, I think, the key to success. It is possible using a variety of technologies, including ground penetrating radar, RFIDs, et cetera, to identify the approximate location of utilities that are already under the ground. But the best way is when they're exposed. And so during construction or when earth is exposing existing utilities, that's the time to send a crew out there to capture it. And what we're seeing a lot of airports doing is to have on-call surveyors that have the right equipment and expertise to be able to go into these spaces and not delay construction in any way, but go in an as-needed basis and capture that utility. The next key to integrating all that data with GIS is to capture it in a good data model. One of the things that Esri has recently published is new network utility management data models and some of the capabilities that are in the various software solutions that Esri offers. And I think we'll see that as another growing and emerging trend in our industry. And so things like capturing the various utility lines, the different nodes, the sources of where stuff enters a utility network, and then the places where it exits the network as well, and capturing that data not only geospatially, but also in a manner that has the right topology, so things are connected to one another, and also so that they're properly identified, so that each asset that forms that utility network has an identifier in it. And that identifier then can be used to link to other systems, whether it be condition assessment reports, maintenance work orders, or a variety of other pieces of information that ultimately have value to learning how to manage those utility networks, but can be more precisely located and more effectively used if we can tie them together, and those identifiers are key. So those are some of the methods, just to summarize my answer: standards, identifiers, accurate locations when utilities are exposed, and then the use of some of the resources that are out there from the American Society of Civil Engineers is what I'd recommend.
Yeah, so, and actually, I'll just to add to that, I would encourage everyone in the audience. We do have coming up in March the AAAE Geospatial Conference in Fort Myers, Florida. Typically, you would, every one that I've been to, there's always a presentation on subsurface utilities, actually several, and it's really just a good opportunity to learn from your colleagues and across airports, and so you really can kind of see some of the best practice. Let's see, there's another question that really has to do with operations, and the the statement is really that airports already have systems for operation, and that pointing to the importance of integrating GIS with some of those operational systems. And I guess I'll take this one. I think that's certainly for Esri, we see that as a key area that I think we'd like to see airports move. We did an article on Geneva Airport in Geneva, Switzerland, that really built their operations command center around GIS and the ability to bring together these various operational systems, really with the intent of how do we increase operational efficiency. And they really had quite severe constraints. They have one runway and didn't have room to expand an additional runway. And so really the solution was they had to become much more operationally efficient. And as a matter of fact, GIS was the centerpiece of that process, and it was really a great success story and really sort of a tremendous ROI that they were able to document. Another example that I would point to is actually Las Vegas McCarran, and they've actually integrated the GIS with what I would really call their AODB, their Airport Operations Database, so that they can in real time look at each gate and understand both the arrivals and departures, and really for not only each gate but each pier and across the airport. And being able to do that then actually allows you to better plan a whole range of other activities. So when do you plan your maintenance activities and so forth, and just so that you have a better real-time understanding of the real-time activity in your airport. So we do see that as a rapidly growing area. Randy, David, you want to add to that? My soapbox there.
Yeah, no, I think Terry, you've outlined some of the great reasons why GIS can be effective in operations and some successes that have been achieved in it. I'd go on to say that, one of the keys to achieving success in the operational context, because we are seeing more and more software platforms be available for operational purposes, whether it be on the airfield or on landside elements of the airport or inside the building as well. And what they all seem to boil down to in terms of integrating with GIS is what I was describing with utilities, is the ability to identify assets in a well-structured data platform, and then to have identifiers that can tie those pieces of information to other systems. Too often we've come into projects after those systems have been implemented and the data structures established with it. And when they're done without the geospatial context in mind, it becomes a lot harder to interface with. Maybe things that have disparate geographic locations have been grouped into a single asset just because they have similar characteristics. Maybe things have been grouped in ways that really aren't compatible to how you might structure another system. And so those types of discussions, I think, are important to have when these systems are implemented. And so I think that's the key to success there, because those hundreds of thousands of assets that are out there, they're just growing as well. And having the information all tied together is really where that benefit is. And I want to mention one other thing with regard to operational data at airports. One thing is the fixed assets that I've been talking about. But the other element of it is movable assets, things like vehicles and equipment and what have you, and trying to track them within a GIS, and also events where there's no physical thing you can touch, but the fact that something happened at the location, whether it be an accident or an outage or something, is really important to track as well. Unfortunately, the geodatabase models that are available can track all that data, and then some of the tools that Esri offers, such as GeoVet server and what have you, can do a great job at bringing in all that quote-unquote big data and processing it and turning it into dashboard information or specific alerts that people that need to respond to those types of things can pay attention to. So I think there's a lot of good growth in those areas.
Yeah, no, I agree. There is another question having to do with as the ArcGIS for aviation airports available on a 30-day trial? Yes, you can go to the website and we'll be happy to, or you can send me an email and we'll be happy to connect you to the folks on that team. And you know, you might need just a little bit of assistance to really sort of get going. But we do, it's a great way of not only meeting your FAA airports GIS requirements, but we think it provides a nice foundation for really building out an airport's GIS for kind of smaller and mid-sized airports as well. And then let's see, there's a question having to do with how can GIS be used in asset management in airports? I mean, you sort of mentioned that, but you want to expand on that, Randy? And you know, certainly we at Esri try to integrate with all of the leading asset management, you know, sort of programs, whether it's SAP, whether it's Maximo, whether it's CityWorks, but you want to speak a little bit to that, Randy? You've certainly had good experience in that area.
Absolutely. Well, I think there's many dimensions to asset management that you've touched on, Terry. One is maintenance management, maintain those assets. Another one is the financial element of the asset, what it costs to purchase or build or buy the asset, what does it cost to maintain it, what is the total cost of ownership, how does that diminish with time, and as well as the replacement cost. We see that, for instance, a lot with pavement management solutions, where you look at it as sort of a curve, and making the decision as when to invest in replacing that asset is such an important financial decision that airports need to make as well. So again, GIS, I think, can be used to help bring all that information together into a common way, and having those assets identified across the organizational boundaries in the same manner. So not only the maintenance technicians that are maintaining them are talking about the same assets, but the people looking at the financial side of them and the planning and construction side of them and other elements to those assets are all talking about the same things that are out there. In order to achieve that, one of the best practices that I've seen out there is to create an asset registry. Now, that asset registry could reside in one of the softwares. It could reside, for instance, I've seen many airports in their maintenance management system establish the asset registry and then have that be the authoritative source for defining what assets are out there. Other airports have implemented the asset registry within the GIS and have the GIS define what the assets are, and other systems can read that information. We've also seen airports establish, there is companies that make asset registry software and do it in such a separate application, but then other applications tie to that. But I think that's really the key to asset management is to make sure everyone's talking about the same things and then tying information, putting their piece of the information, attaching their piece of the information and extracting then what they need from others out of that.
Yeah, let me re-emphasize the financial element, which is critically important. And certainly my experience is that, you know, under GASB 34 and other requirements, you really have to have a financial accounting of your assets. Most accountants will do a 20, 30-year depreciation, just straight line depreciation. Well, in fact, when you have the GIS and you have a very good, competent asset registry, and you understand best practice in asset management, condition-based and predictive, you know, maintenance management, that in fact you really can extend the life of those assets quite significantly, and as a result, you can actually save quite a bit, and that's something that your finance guys don't always understand. So I think that's a really, really important dialogue. And certainly the more that you can help the finance guys understand that, the more they're going to be strongly supportive of your efforts over on the asset and maintenance management side and on the GIS side as well. So will certainly, our goal is to actually have a whole separate webinar in the future on that. So stay tuned for that. All right, so there's another question here. What's the final question? What's the use case for BIM in the operational phase?
Well, that's a great question, because we've heard a lot of uses for BIM data, and a lot of the data that is necessary to operate a facility is first created in the design portion. So if you're designing in BIM and documenting what's been built in BIM, then that's a great tool for doing that. What we're seeing a lot of people looking at, though, is extracting that data and putting it into systems that do maintenance management or financial management of assets after that. So the trend seems to be extracting the elements of the BIM data, the definition of the asset, and certain parameters or properties about that asset, and bringing it into other systems, as opposed to trying to ask BIM to do everything for everybody. You know, that's one of the ways GIS had some struggles early on. It's when people said, well, you know, let's have the GIS do this, that, and everything. And really the key to success has been let GIS do what it does best, which is geographic information and topology and network management, but then tie it to other systems. And I think that's the trend that we're seeing emerge with BIM as well. So the use case for BIM, much as that flow chart I showed earlier about the relationship of BIM and GIS, is for BIM to be effective in the design building phase, but then to hand information off to other systems for the operations maintenance phase through some of the data interoperability mechanisms that we've talked about.
Yep. Yeah, I completely agree. All right. Well, Randy and David, thank you both, and thank everyone on the line for attending this first of this new series, and we look forward to speaking with you in the future. So again, thank you, and as we did mention, the slides will be available to you on the GeoNet Department of Transportation website. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you.